Amen. Thank you for your good singing. You can be seated. Tonight I am continuing a study I started last week. If I can get my phone to behave. There we go. All right. So this evening is, like I said last week, it's more of a mess than a message. That it is not a full-blown sermon, it's really more of a Bible study. What I'm hoping to do, trying to do in the evening hour, is to kind of give a high-altitude overview of other parts of the story of Abraham. As in Sunday mornings this month, I'm focusing on the story of Abraham's offering up of Isaac. Previously, I've preached on the call of Abraham, so there's about 10 chapters in between that. And last Sunday night, we spent some time surveying some of those portions. If you want to open up to a passage to begin with tonight, you could turn to Genesis chapter 18, which is where we left our patriarch last time. Now, you have a handout this evening, which is partly like what you had last week. Last week, you had that as page 1, and then what you have, you have then the second page, which you still have. You have a page that's been corrected. And then I provided for you some maps and images as well on the back. So I'm going to use this for a moment just to zoom in to let you know, to remind you some things that we talked about, that the book of Genesis is divided up into 10 parts. After the introduction, which is in chapter 1, the creation account, beginning in chapter 2, running through chapter 4 is the story of creation's fall. Actually, I should say into chapter 4. Then there's a section about Adam's race. It's actually chapter 5, verse 1. Then there's a story of Noah's flood. And then the recounting of Noah's sons. And those 4 sections right there, they each begin with the statement, these are the generations of so-and-so. And then the heart of the book really begins after that, when we move into the story about the patriarchs, that is the fathers of ancient Israel. There's a short section about Shem's sons, and then a very long section, which is what we are overviewing, about Abraham. It runs from the end of chapter 11 all the way to the middle of chapter 25. The life of Abraham, I'm going to zoom out. Again, this is looking at the chart from last week. You can divide up the life of Abraham into 5 major segments. You have the section where he is called by the Lord at the beginning of chapter 12. There's a section where he has a conflict with Pharaoh. He lies, he leans on his own understanding, tries to get out of an awkward situation, lies about his wife, says she's his sister, and the Lord nonetheless delivers him. That is parallel, I'm going to roll over, that's paralleled by another conflict he has with another regional leader some years later, and he does exactly the same foolish thing. But the Lord delivers him. So, interesting that there's 2 examples of Abraham being rather foolish, and in between there is these stories about all of this intrigue with his nephew, Lot, and Abraham. And most of the time, Abraham lives by faith. Lot lives rather carnally. Although there's instances where Abraham does very foolish things too. So on the back page is detail about this section. As I scroll down a little, you can see that this part has 3 major sections, and we're going to go in just a moment to the back page and pick up our study there. I'm going to first direct your attention, though, to on the back of your handout are some maps. Over on the left side, I'm going to zoom in, the map on the left side shows you the kind of journeys that Abram had made. Now, he comes from Ur of the Chaldees, which is someplace way up there. It's not even on the map. It was a long journey, and then he comes down to Haran, which is close to Syria, and then journeys all the way down, and for 75 years he will journey up and down the Promised Land, never building a house, never putting down roots, living in tents all the time. And for the first 25 years, he has no legitimate offspring. But God keeps assuring him again and again, I'm going to make your name great. I'm going to make you a great nation. And through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And he keeps believing. Almost an impossible belief, but God is testing him. And of course, on Sunday mornings, we've been looking at the ultimate test that he gives to Abram about that son whom he finally gave. He now tells him to sacrifice him. Well, when we left Abram last time, he was down here in the south of Israel in Beersheba. That is where he spends quite a bit of his time. This is the spot, by the way, down in the south where the Lord will tell him some years later to take his son and travel up to what we believe to be Jerusalem, Moriah, Mount Moriah, to sacrifice his son. Now, I'm going to have you scroll over to the map on the other side. The stories we're looking at tonight are some years earlier. Some years earlier, when Abram does not yet have a son, he's living in this place called Mamre, which is right next to the place known as Hebron, which is still a walled city within Jerusalem. Mamre was actually the name of an individual, a Canaanite who lived in that area, who allowed Abram to set up shop. And we're going to be told in chapter 18 that Abraham has set up shop underneath some great trees in this oasis area. And from here, he's going to be visited by the Lord and angels who are talking about their preparation to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities of the plain. So, before we get into the text, let's take a look more closely. You can either look at the handout or at the screen here. The intrigue that he has with Lot, there's three parts. There's the part where Abram and Lot separate. Lot selfishly, carnally takes the property over by Sodom. Apparently, before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, it was an extremely lush and beautiful place. It was also, well, like a lot of resort towns, very, very sinful and wicked. And Lot was attracted to it for more reason than one. He takes that land so he can pasture his flock, and he ends up ingratiating himself into the culture in the cities of the plain. Meanwhile, Abram goes off more toward the west, and the Lord blesses him. The Lord enables Abram to win an amazing victory when kings from the east come over and sack all of those cities and come down the eastern side of the promised land. Abram, this man in his 80s, is able to rout them and rescue many people. And then the Lord promises to Abram that, yes, I am indeed going to make you a great nation. You're an old man with no kids, and war just seems to be following you everywhere. But I'm going to certify you. And so the Lord takes the promise that he had made to Abraham and upgrades it to a covenant. That happens in chapter 15. Right after that, Abram does something so foolish, though. He starts to think, okay, this is going to happen. I've got to make it happen. And he sires a child with his servants, his wife's servant, Hagar. And the Lord has plans for Ishmael, but it's not the plan that he'd made all along. Abram's faith is weak in that moment. But the Lord then seals the covenant with him. In chapter 17, he reassures him, I am going to make your name great. I am going to make you a great nation. It is not going to be through Ishmael. It'll be through the son that I give you. And then he tests Abraham's faith by making him commit to this covenant by circumcision. A 99-year-old man without a child. It doesn't seem to us to be the logical way to make sure you're going to have a son. And yet, a year later, here comes the child. That covenant is sealed, and so every male descendant of Abraham would take that seal upon him as a reminder of the Lord's provision. We come this evening now to chapter 18, the story of the three visitors and the destruction of Sodom. This is chapters 18 and 19. It is a staggering story, a sad story in so many different levels. We'll start here in verses 1 through 16, where we're told about the heavenly visitors who come to Abraham and to Sarah. And the first thing that they have to do by the honor code of the day is to show hospitality. And yet even above the honor code of the day, that, when people in the eastern deserts, when they come to you, you're expected to provide them a certain level of respect. There's something far more going on here in verses 1 to 8. Let's look at chapter 18, verse 1. Now, the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please, a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, and I will bring a piece of bread, that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, So do as you have said. Now, there are certain laws of hospitality that still exist within the Middle East today. If you go to Jerusalem today, particularly into the Arab quarter, and if someone invites you, you might get invited into someone's home if you're down a back alley, and there are certain protocols. They have to offer you coffee, they have to offer you that, and you're supposed to oblige to a certain point. This is just part of the protocol. You can refuse any hashish they might try to put in your coffee, but they are expected to care for you to a certain degree. If anyone should come looking for you, they, as a good host, will put up a defense to try to protect you. Well, those sorts of rules are at play here, but there's something so different happening. Now, Moses tells us in verse 1 that the Lord, and notice it's Yahweh, appeared to him. And when Abram addresses the key character of the 3, he says to him in verse 3, My Lord. And in the Hebrew Bible, there's a couple different words or ways to spell the word Lord, and this one is the one that's always used when referring to God. It's not the word Yahweh, but it's a special form of the word my master. He maybe isn't completely sure who this is, but suddenly these men have appeared. They're not right in front of him. They're at some distance away. He runs out to meet them. Runs because he recognizes this was not some ordinary arrival. These are not guys who just came over the hill on camels or something. They have had a sort of miraculous appearance, but he's not quite sure what to do. So he offers them the normal protocols of hospitality, to wash their feet, rest under the tree, the oaks or the terebinths. They could be pistachios. There's something in that hot, arid place that provides sufficient shade, and he's going to give them the seat of honor. But he senses that there's some sort of blessing to be had from them. They've appeared for some reason. He doesn't want to presume, but he knows that he ought not just let them pass. So then we come back to verse 6. So Abram hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, Quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes. 3 measures of flour is 20 quarts. This is a huge amount. Now, the kind of loaves that we're not talking about, cinnamon loaf or Amish bread or anything like that. We're talking about little pita type things, flatbreads. Those could be made very quickly. When guests come, that would be the typical thing you do. You gather up a little bit of that and fry it up. And then you'd have something to serve, and whether it's with hummus or whatever it is that you might bring alongside that as a garnish. But this would be enough to make 60 of those little pieces of bread. This is really extended. These are not ordinary guests. And so something fitting of a royal figure is necessary. And then notice verse 7, Abram ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them. He was standing by them under the tree as they ate. Normally, calves like this are only killed for very special events. People, we have a high protein diet. We've got In-N-Out and Five Guys and Fuddruckers and whatever else. We are a burger-eating people. We're a meat-eating people. They did not eat meat nearly as frequently as we do. It's expensive. So to go find a young calf and make some veal out of that, this is a very big deal. And so this process is going to take some hours to butcher it and drain it and then prepare it. So all the time they're entertaining them and preparing whatever feast they can here within haste. And then we have a divine assurance made by these visitors, which, by the way, I'm going to say right now, I do not think that all three of these or each is a member of the Trinity. One of them is identified as the Lord. The other two are going to be sent later on at the end of the chapter to the city of Sodom. They're going to rescue Lot and destroy that city. I don't think that's Jesus and the Holy Spirit. I think those are messengers. But one of these individuals is the Lord in a human form. In fact, we might well say that the Lord to whom he speaks is a Christophany, a Old Testament appearance of the Son of God. Well, there's a divine assurance that they're going to make to Abram about a coming heir. And one of the things that's important about this, the Lord, you think about what's going to happen in the next chapter. The Lord is going to rain fire and sulfur from heaven and destroy cities in the promised land. That doesn't sound real promising. So before this great work of judgment, the Lord comes to Abraham to encourage him and remind him that you are my chosen one, and I am going to make a great nation out of you. Don't misunderstand what's happening over there with what I'm doing with you. They tell him that Sarah is to bear a child in a year. Verse 9 says, then they said to him, where is Sarah your wife? And he said, there in the tent. And the answer is sort of like, well, she can't come right now. I mean, she's making loaves, she's doing all these things, she can't come visit with you. He said, verse 10, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind. Look, this is tents, right? So we're not talking about a piece of wood. The conversation is passing freely here. Things can be heard very easily. But there's an opening, we'll call it a door. Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. Now, Moses adds this. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing, postmenopausal, postmenopausal. Sarah laughed to herself. After I become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? My Lord, referring to Abraham, my Mr., my Master. The expression, shall I have pleasure, that word, pleasure, shows up only here in the Bible. And there's some debate whether it's talking about having sexual intimacy or whether it's talking about conception. Shall I conceive? I tend to think it's about conception because that's the thing that's brought up again and again in the verses that follow. Perhaps there's a sense of having a joy in a child coming in my old age. So there's a correction now made from the Lord about Sarah's unbelief in verses 13 through 15. And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I indeed bear a child when I am so old? And by the way, notice the way that the Lord rephrases what she said. Shall I bear a child? Not shall I have pleasure, but I think more specifically, shall I bear a child when I'm so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Humanly speaking, it is laughable. I mean, there's a reason why they named the kid Laughter when he's born a year later. It really is laughable. And yet, there's that mixture of faith coming in with that, which is humanly impossible. The Lord bringing about. Men couldn't do that. They couldn't do it. They've been trying for years and years and years and years and years. They've been trying probably 85 years to have children. And this time next year, you're going to have a kid. Now, their whole life has, for the last 24 years, has been predicated on this promise, but you can see there's, at least with Sarah, that faith goes up and down, up and down. This is one of those down moments. Now, verse 15, Sarah denied it, however, saying, I did not laugh. You know, they weren't even talking to her. She's on the other side of the tent wall. Sort of chimes in. For she was afraid. Now, she didn't laugh out loud. It was one of those things she said to herself. And the Lord gets to the heart, doesn't he? He says, no, but you did laugh. The Lord who knows the hearts here makes it bare to her. And then beginning in verse 16, we start to transition over to the story of Sodom. Then the men arose from there and looked down towards Sodom. Down because they're in the hill country. Sodom is off to the east, down the slopes towards on the other side of the Dead Sea and to the south. Looked down towards Sodom, and Abram was walking with them to send them off. We come now into a new section, and no, we don't. We have just missing verses from the chart. Oh, well. Oh, no, okay. On the next column, the doom of Sodom and Lot's rescue, chapter 18, verse 17. Yahweh has plans for Sodom's destruction. We were told early, several chapters before, there was a little aside comment. Now, the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked. And we'll get a glimpse of it in the story to come. One example of their wickedness. Centuries later, the prophets would decry the wickedness of Sodom. They would describe their wickedness in terms of gross sexual immorality. They would describe it in terms of terribly inhospitable abuse of people. It wasn't all just sexual sin, but they were, of course, very well known for that. And the Lord is making plans to destroy Sodom. There have been a few times in the Bible where the Lord has revealed his plans for judgment. It was revealed back in the days of Noah. The Lord looked upon the hearts of men that they were exceedingly wicked, and he purposed to destroy them. And then after the flood at the Tower of Babel, the Lord looked down from heaven and saw what they were planning and purposed to bring judgment. Now here's the third time in the Bible, in the ancient days, where the Lord prepares to put a stop to what was exceedingly gross wickedness. The Lord makes a decision here to disclose his plan to Abraham in verse 17. The Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him, so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. Fascinating insight into the discussion. Is this the Lord talking to the two angels beside him? Is this in any way like in Isaiah chapter 6 when the Lord is surrounded by angels and he says, who shall go for us? There's sort of a heavenly council perhaps in that scene. There certainly is a council here. The angels, though, don't give him any input. The Lord shares his thoughts. He needs no counselor, you know. But in this aside, as the Lord is deliberating what he should disclose, we see his plan for Abraham. Yes, judgment is going to come, but God has a greater plan for blessing in the world. And that blessing is going to be funneled through one man. Remember, this is the way Genesis works. There'll be huge stretches of history, but the book will slow down to focus on one man, and it speeds up to focus on one man. It starts with Adam. It speeds up, and then it's Noah, and then it speeds up, and then it's Abraham, and then it really slows down. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Israel. He's funneling his blessing into the world. And because of the importance of this man and his plan, the Lord determines he ought to know what I'm doing here. lest he misunderstand, lest he think this is a cursed place that he ought to leave, lest he think this has all been a lie. So the Lord decides to disclose the plan. So he announces the decision and initiates it in verses 20 to 22. Verse 20, and the Lord said, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. The outcry, meaning there are people there who have been oppressed, abused. It might also be in the sense that the land itself is crying up in protest, just as the land cried up to God in protest after Abel slew his brother. Cain slew his brother, Abel. So also the earth is in some sense crying out under the weight of sin. Verse 21, I will go down now and see if they've done entirely according to its outcry which has come to me. If not, I will know. Now I will go down. Now here the Lord is on the earth. He is in the form of a man talking with Abram and these others. So going down means going to the southeast. Going down from the hill country, down the land. So he's going to send the two angels with him so that they can be eyewitnesses to it. Now, again, the Lord knows everything. But we find in pages of Scripture that the Lord also is extremely patient. And sometimes he performs things in such a way so that no human can look upon what he did and say, well, that wasn't fair. Lest there be any doubt about how bad it is, he sends heavenly messengers to investigate. And so in verses 23 to 33 then, or 22, then the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom while Abraham was still standing there before the Lord. I'm going to zoom over to that map that I showed you, the second map. So they're here at Mamre, near Hebron, and they're looking down south to the southeast. And so the men, the two angels, angelic messengers, will travel this road down south of the Dead Sea to those cities of the plain. You see, south of the Dead Sea here, this is a large plain area. It's a big drain. And there is, we don't know the exact locations of Sodom and Gomorrah. They were destroyed pretty well. But they've been able to at least find Zoar and Admah and Zeboim. Down they'll go to investigate this, so that there not be any debate about whether the judgment was deserved or not. And then there's this curious section in verses 23 to 33 where Abraham makes intercession for the righteous. He knows Lot is there. Lot and his wife and their kids and some of their extended family. And Lot has been foolish and carnal, but he is, in essence, a righteous man. He's a compromised righteous man. He did go along with Abraham. He did go in faith with him, left everything behind to come down in the promised land. He's made many compromised decisions, and Peter will tell us that he vexed his righteous soul by the things that he subjected himself to. It's an enigma. We wonder how in the world can he do what he did. So Abraham tries to see how bad it really is there. And is the Lord going to just destroy everybody? Well, there's got to be some good people there, right? I mean, there's always good people somewhere, aren't there? So, verse 23, Abraham came near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous which are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? But this is bold talk, isn't it? He's trying to... I don't think Abraham understands how bad it is at Sodom. He knows that there are some people who know the Lord there, and it just seems this is too much. This is overblown. If there's 50, won't you spare it? And so the response of the Lord, look at that, verse 26. So the Lord, that is, so Yahweh said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare the whole place on their account. And of course, then the Lord doesn't call the messengers back. He doesn't change his plan. So Abraham starts to calculate. Maybe there's less than 50. Verse 28 of 27, and Abraham replied, Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord, although I am but dust and ashes. Suppose the 50 righteous are lacking 5. We destroy the whole city because of 5. That is, let's say there's only 45. 5 less than that. And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. He spoke to him yet again and said, Suppose 40 are found there. And he said, I will not do it on the account of the 40. Then he said, O my master, do not be angry, and I shall speak. Suppose 30 are found there. And he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, Now behold, I venture to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of the 20. Then he said, Oh my Lord, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak only this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of the 10. As soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place. Apparently, as swiftly as he had arrived, so he leaves. And Abraham goes back over to the west, back towards his home, temporary home at Mount Moriah. I want you to think now for a moment how this parallels the story we've been looking at on Sunday morning. Years later, the Lord says to Abraham, Take your son, your only son, whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering for me in the land of Moriah, in the hills of Moriah, the place that I will show you. And Abraham doesn't say a thing. We're struck by the boldness of his interaction with the Lord. He senses that the Lord is favoring him, that the Lord is disclosing things to him, so he assumes, and rightly, that he can interact. And yet he realizes by the end of all of this that his perception of things has been all wrong. Things are so much worse than he realized. And so some decades later, when an even more amazing word of death is announced, he doesn't say a thing except, Here I am. There's a maturing in faith, I think, that we see in Abram from this great event and the greater event, which happens in chapter 22. And then the judgment on the cities of the plain starts in chapter 19. Lot, the nephew of Abram, shows hospitality to the visitors. And it's just, in a way, it's kind of like what Abraham had done at the beginning of the last chapter. Heavenly messengers come. Abraham senses there's something different about this. We must show hospitality. We must abound in hospitality. There is some blessing to be had here. And Lot, visited by 2 of them, senses it too. It's an indication that he still had some kind of a moral compass within him, though I think the needle was bent at times. Verses 1 to 3. Now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, as Lot was sitting in the gates of Sodom. What a difference. Now, where was Abram sitting? Abram was sitting in his tent, and here's Lot sitting in the gate. Meaning that he, for one thing, he's not living as a sojourner anymore. He's decided to live amongst the Canaanites in a city. And he's ingratiated himself so that he's in a place of leadership. He's regarded as to sit in the gate of the city means to serve as an administrator, as a judge, an arbitrator. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. That he could tell something. Either it was disclosed to him in his mind or something that he had seen or heard before in his times with Abraham. he knew that these were not just normal passengers. And verse 2, and he said, "Now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may arise early and go on your way." They said, however, "No, but we shall spend the night in the square." Now, what they're doing is acting as a mirror to Lot. They know how bad it is there, but they want him to come to see how bad it is. Verse 3, yet he urged them strongly. So they turned aside him and entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread. And they ate unleavened because that doesn't have to rise. It can be made more quickly. These guys have had a lot of bread. Well, Lot knew that it was not safe for them to stay out. Now, it should have been safe. Many times visitors would come into a city, and if they didn't know anyone, they might find a large spot in the courtyard and just sort of set up tent and stay until they needed to. And generally, the morals of the place would allow that to happen for a short time at least. But now we're told about the lust-driven inhospitality, which will then result in the angelic judgment on the men who try to commit it. Verse 4, before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so that we may have relations with them." Literally, so that we may know them. The same idiom used to describe how Adam knew his wife when she had a child. But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind them and said, "Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now behold, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with men. Please let me bring them out to you and do to them whatever you like. Only do nothing to these men, inasmuch as they have come under the shelter of my roof." Oh, what a terribly twisted soul Lot has become. Yes, he has the responsibility of hospitality and protecting these men, but he's willing to compromise his own daughter's virginity. Now, it is a mercy that these men were so sick that they wouldn't even go along with that. A mercy to his daughters. Verse 9, but they said, "Stand aside." Furthermore, they said, "This one," that's Lot, "came in as an alien and already is acting like a judge. Now we will treat you worse than them." So they pressed hard against Lot and came near to break the door. Lot has been playing Mr. Politics. And now it's come back to bite him. They knew he was an outsider. Now they use it against him because he won't give in to what they want. So they pressed hard against Lot and came near to break the door. Verse 10, but the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. They struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves trying to find the doorway. You wonder if they even realized what had happened to them at the moment. They're still desperately trying to get in to satisfy their lust. Now, the sun was setting, it was getting dark, and suddenly it goes really dark. If they don't stop, what an image it is of total depravity. Of even when the hand of God is upon sinners to restrain them, that they kick against the pricks and want to go more, do more, and keep going. Well, then in verse 12 through 16, the angels give assistance to Lot and his family to flee the city. The 2 men said to Lot, "Whom else have you here? A son-in-law and your sons and your daughters, and whoever you have in the city, bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place." Literally, we are destroying this place. Because their outcry has become so great before the Lord that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. By the way, the word destroy is the same word used to describe what happened to the earth with the flood. Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were to marry his daughters, and said, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city." But he appeared to his son-in-laws to be jesting. It's a terrible thing when you've compromised your testimony so badly that when you finally have something urgent to say about what the Lord thinks about something, that no one will listen to you. Verse 15, when the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city." So how many have we got here? Lot and his wife, 2 daughters, 4 sort of righteous souls. Not even 10. Verse 16, but he hesitated. What? He hesitated. So the men seized his hand, and the hand of his wife, and the hands of his 2 daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him. And they brought him out and put him outside the city. Whether this is some sort of angelic movement or they're just walking rapidly, it's not clear, but they are being delivered rapidly. And then Lot, just as Abraham had made a petition to spare Sodom, if maybe there were enough righteous people, now Lot makes a petition to spare one of these cities in verse 17. When they had brought them outside, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you. Do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away." But Lot said to them, "Oh, no, my lords. Now, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your kindness, which you have shown to me by saving my life. I cannot escape to the mountains, for the disaster will overtake me, and I will die." I've forgotten how to live in tents. Now behold, this town is near enough to flee to, and it is small. Surely the offense of the sin there can't be that bad. Please, let me escape there. Is it not small? That my life may be saved. He said to them, "Behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town which you've spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." It is the angel is under instruction not to bring down fire till Lot is rescued. And then verse 22 ends, "Therefore the name of the town was called Zoar," which means small thing. I want you to look at the bottom picture. This is a rendering of, if you're out in the desert to the east of that, this is here, you could see from a distance, you could see all of these cities. There's Sodom there on the left, Gomorrah there to the right, and then there's that little place Zoar in between. And the other 2 cities, which are also said to be destroyed, Admah and Zeboim, those 4 are, the big 4 are going to fall. But the little place of Zoar will be spared. Well, we're almost done. And so is Sodom. In verse 23, the sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Verse 24, the overthrow of the cities of the plain happens along with the tragic death of his wife. Verse 24, then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Wow, the Lord rained down from the Lord. It's insisting that, whatever the means that God used, was it volcanic activity? There is evidence of that. The southeastern side of the Dead Sea does show a lot of volcanic activity. The 2 places that are thought to be Sodom and Gomorrah were overthrown by what looks like volcanic activity. Whatever means God used, it was the Lord who did it. Twice we're told he's the agent of it. Verse 25, that he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground, that place that had been, as an earlier spot said, like the garden of the Lord. Verse 26, but his wife, from behind him, looked back And the idea is not that she just wanted to see the fireworks. She looked back longingly. She'd come to like Sodom. Maybe it was not going to be that big of a thing. And so her lack of faith is demonstrated. Perhaps we could say there were not even 4 righteous. And she became a pillar of salt. Instant judgment on her. Verse 27, now Abraham arose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. And now there's a summary of the destruction in verse 29. Thus it came about, when God destroyed the cities of the valley, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. Abraham had pleaded for the deliverance of the righteous. There were not enough righteous people to spare the city, but the Lord did spare the righteous. Even if we have to say small r righteous, badly compromised righteous man who knew who the Lord was and knew enough to obey, at least in part. The Lord saved Lot largely because of Abraham's intercession. Well, I don't have time to continue on tonight, but the next time, and I think in a couple of weeks, next week Pastor Ed will be speaking, we'll see one last reference to Lot, the spiritual demise of his family. Well, can I do it? Can I do it? Let me do it. Give me 5 minutes. I just committed a major error. I'm not supposed to do that. But Lot moves into the mountains in verse 30. Lot went on from Zoar and stayed in the mountains, which was ridiculous because he said he couldn't do that, but there he goes. And his 2 daughters with him, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar, and he stayed in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. And then notice the debauchery. His daughters have been infected by the debauchery of the place they left. They got out of Sodom, but they didn't get Sodom out of them. Verse 31. Then the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner on earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may preserve our family through our father. We've got to have children. We're not going to meet anybody in the cave. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. And he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. He was so drunk. On the following day, the firstborn said to the younger, behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve our family through our father. Let's lean on our own understanding. So they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. And then the next 2 verses tell us this is where some of Israel's greatest enemies came from. Verse 36, thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. Moab means from the father. As for the younger, she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the sons of Ammon to this day. When Israel first read this story after it had been inked, I'm sure they heard it, but after it was inked, some of the greatest trouble they face from the Moabites and the Ammonites, people that they have a kind of a kinship with, but things went so south. Oh my, the world can make such a mess. When God's people compromise themselves with the world, sometimes the effects of that go on for generations. There are people who know the Lord, they've had a real saving experience with the Lord, they still have a conscience, but things are just kind of, everything's in kind of a warp. And they make decisions, foolish decisions, carnal decisions, and the implications of that are dire. Now, if they truly know the Lord will discipline them. Yes, that's a sign. Now, there's no discipline, then they're not really children of the Lord. But they may discipline them, but I tell you, the fruit of that kind of carnality can go on and on and on and on. And sometimes what is a compromised spiritual life in the parent turns out to an utter loss of spirituality in the next generation. And certainly you see it in the Moabites and the Ammonites, people who hardly even maintain any knowledge of the Lord at all. So in a world all around about us that's full of all manner of iniquity and sin, where the knowledge of the Lord is not had, we need to be, in these stories, more like Abraham, set apart, distinct, not ingratiating ourselves with the world because we'll find that the world will find a home in us. You know what the world is. We talk about the world, love not the world. The world is the sum total of all of our carnal impulses as it's orchestrated by the enemy. It becomes almost this system of thought and desires and viewpoints. Love not the world, says John, neither the things that are in the world. Because all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passes away, and its lusts. But thank God there is a life eternal, full of a different kind of joy, if we will live by faith. Lord, we pray that we would so live by faith this week as we walk in the world in which you've left us. Help us to walk wisely, walk in faith in what you've promised, and though the delay of your promises may be long, may we hold on to the reality that the joy that will come is so much better than the best things the world can offer to us. We ask it in Christ's name.